Clara Dawson had imagined her wedding day 1,000 different ways, but never like this. She had pictured sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows, the gentle music of the organ, the proud smile on her father's face as he walked her down the aisle. She had imagined the nervous but adoring expression on Mark's face as he slipped the ring on her finger, promising forever. What she had not imagined was silence. Deafening silence, broken only by the whisper of restless guests shifting in their seats and the sharp buzz of her phone vibrating in her trembling hand. One short message blinked across the screen. "I can't do this. Don't wait for me." The phone slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the marble floor. The collective gasp of two families filled the church. Her mother pressed a hand against her chest as if she had been struck. Her father muttered something under his breath about humiliation. On the other side of the aisle, Mark's parents looked everywhere except at Clara, their faces stiff with embarrassment. A murmur rose among the guests, whispers blending with pitying glances that made her skin burn. Clara stood frozen in her lace gown veil, trembling with every shaky breath. She wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to beg him to come back and not destroy her life in front of everyone she knew. But her voice refused to come. The world felt like it had tilted, spinning too fast, while she remained nailed to the ground. Her bridesmaids hovered uncertainly, exchanging awkward glances, as if afraid her heartbreak might stain them by association. Her father's voice cut through the haze. "We need to get her out of here," he said gruffly, though his tone carried more shame than concern. "This is a disgrace." The word pierced her chest. Disgrace, as if she were the one who had fled, as if the failure of this day belonged to her alone. Clara's throat closed, and without thinking she turned and bolted down the aisle, ignoring the gasps, ignoring the clicking of phones that captured her retreat. She burst out into the cold Chicago air, the hem of her gown dragging across the pavement. The honk of a passing cab pulled her back into motion. She raised her hand wildly, and the driver, eyes widening at the sight of a bride alone, screeched to a stop. "Union Station." Clara choked out as she collapsed into the back seat. The driver hesitated, but she thrust a crumpled bill at him. "Please, just go." As the car lurched forward, Clara pressed her forehead to the glass, watching the city blur by. The tears came then hot and relentless, smudging her mascara until it streaked her cheeks. Somewhere behind her, the wedding guests would be filing out of the church, whispering, speculating, retelling the story that would travel faster than any train. She could already imagine the headlines the bride left at the altar. Union Station loomed ahead, massive and indifferent. The cab rolled to a stop, and Clara stumbled out, clutching the skirts of her gown in one hand and the handle of her small overnight bag in the other. She had packed it for a honeymoon she would never take. Now it was all she had. The cavernous hall swallowed her whole as she stepped inside, the echo of her heels sharp against the marble. Commuters and travelers slowed to stare. Some whispered, some pointed, some lifted their phones. She caught fragments. "Runaway bride, poor thing, must be staged." Their eyes weighed her down, turning her into a spectacle rather than a human being. Clara quickened her pace, heart hammering until she found a row of wooden benches near the departure boards. She dropped onto one, clutching her bag to her chest, veil slipping sideways. Her reflection in the darkened glass of the ticket window startled her. Mascara streaked down her face hair, once neatly pinned, now falling in damp curls around her shoulders. The gown, so carefully chosen now, looked ridiculous and out of place in the station's harsh fluorescent light. She looked less like a bride and more like a ghost haunting the place where dreams ended. A burst of laughter drew her attention. A group of teenagers across the hall had lifted their phones, angling them toward her. Runaway bride. Nobody wanted her. One boy sneered loud enough for her to hear. His friends howled, egging him on. Clara's chest constricted. She turned her face away, gripping her bag tighter, wishing the marble floor would open up and swallow her whole. She heard the click of a camera shutter, followed by another laugh. The image would be online within minutes, shared, mocked, dissected by strangers. Her stomach clenched. She had been abandoned once already today, but somehow this was worse. This was not just rejection. This was spectacle. This was her pain turned into entertainment. Clara closed her eyes, inhaling the sharp scent of diesel and iron, trying to block out the noise. She told herself she only needed to last until the next departure. She would buy a one-way ticket, board the train, and disappear. Maybe somewhere far away she could be anonymous again. But as she sat there, mascara streaked and heart shattered, Clara could not shake the thought that her life had derailed in the most public, humiliating way imaginable. And she could not imagine how it would ever get back on track. Union Station was not built for heartbreak, but that night it became Clara Dawson's unwilling confessional. The vast ceilings arched high above her, like indifferent witnesses, their gilded beams catching the last light of day before the station settled into its evening rhythm. Travelers streamed past, lugging rolling suitcases, clutching children by the hand, speaking in hurried bursts of conversation, none of them pausing long enough to see her as anything but a curiosity. The fluorescent lights flickered harsh against her pale skin and the lace of her ruined gown. Every sound seemed amplified, the squeal of wheels on the tracks, the crackle of the loudspeaker announcing, delays, the hiss of the opening doors. Clara sat perfectly still on the wooden bench, the small overnight bag pressed against her like a shield. Her fingers clutched at the strap until her knuckles whitened. She knew she had to move to buy a ticket to make a decision, but paralysis held her. She could still feel the phantom weight of the phone in her hand, the words that had ended her life, as she knew it echoing mercilessly. "I can't do this. Don't wait for me." She wanted to laugh at the cruelty of it, the cowardice of ending years of promises with a single text. The laughter never came. Instead, memories poured in unbidden and relentless. She remembered how Mark had first kissed her under the string lights at a summer street festival, how she had believed it meant destiny. She remembered how he had promised that once he got the promotion, once things stabilized, they would marry, and how she had waited patiently through every delay. She remembered telling her boss she could not take the job offer in Boston because Mark wanted to stay in Chicago. She remembered her mother's proud tears when she had shown her the engagement ring, the way her father had boomed with approval, saying at last, "Our girl has found a solid man." All of it seemed absurd, now flimsy illusions collapsing with a single message. Clara's stomach churned as her mind replayed the last few months. The signs had been there, she realized. Mark pulling away during conversations, his excuses about late nights at work, the lack of enthusiasm when they toured reception halls. She had noticed, but she had smoothed over every crack, convincing herself that cold feet were normal, that love was supposed to be patient. She had given and given until there was nothing left to give, and still it had not been enough. Around her, the station continued its indifferent motion. A businessman in a gray overcoat barked into his phone, his suitcase clattering over the tile. A young mother balanced a sleeping toddler on her shoulder, exhaustion etched into her face. A pair of college students laughed as they showed each other memes on their phones. Life went on, oblivious to the implosion of hers. Clara felt like a ghost moving through a city that no longer acknowledged her existence. She wanted to stand to scream to tell them all that she was not just some tragic headline, not just a runaway bride meme, but her throat was thick with shame. She stared at the departure board, its yellow letters flickering. St. Louis, Denver, Los Angeles. Each destination felt like an invitation to run, to leave behind the whispers and the humiliation to start over where no one knew her name. She rose unsteadily and walked toward the ticket counter, her gown dragging behind her. The clerk, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, raised her brows at the sight. "Can I help you?" she asked flatly, though her gaze lingered on the veil slipping off Clara's hair. "One way," Clara whispered. "Anywhere." The woman frowned. "Ma'am, you'll need to pick a city." Clara hesitated, glancing again at the board. Her mind snagged on a small town name she had never heard before, tucked between two larger destinations. "There," she said, pointing with trembling fingers. The woman tapped at her keyboard, printed the ticket, slid it across the counter. Clara handed over cash, nearly dropping the bills with her shaking hands. She clutched the ticket like a lifeline as she stepped aside, heart pounding. She had no idea what awaited her at that destination. That was the point. She needed to disappear. Back at the bench, she sank down again, eyes on the crumpled ticket in her lap. The idea of starting fresh both terrified and soothed her. She imagined stepping off the train into a quiet town where no one recognized her face, where she could invent a story that erased the humiliation of today. She imagined finding a job, an apartment with peeling paint, maybe even the chance to be invisible for once. Invisible seemed safer than exposed. But as she sat there, doubt crept in. Was she really brave enough to build a new life alone? Or was she just running again the way she had run from the church? From the stairs, from the weight of her family's disappointment. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "You always give too much, Clara. One day you'll give yourself away completely." Her father's voice followed harsher. "This is a disgrace." She pressed her hands against her ears as if she could block them out, but the voices lived inside her now. She wanted silence, but silence only magnified the ache in her chest. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe. The station smelled of metal, an old stone, of fried food from the concession stands, of the faint trace of perfume from passing strangers. Each scent anchored her to the present, reminding her that she was still here, still alive, even if she felt gutted. She told herself she could survive one more hour, one more train, just long enough to get away. A whistle shrieked in the distance. The vibration of an arriving train rattled the bench beneath her. She imagined herself stepping onto it, the doors closing behind her, the city receding as steel wheels carried her toward a future unformed. The image should have comforted her. Instead, it hollowed her out, because no matter where she went, she would still be the woman abandoned at the altar, the runaway bride immortalized on some teenager's TikTok. She would carry the disgrace with her like an invisible veil. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. She whispered to herself, almost inaudible, "I'm a bride with no groom. Not even a destination." The words tasted bitter. For the first time she admitted that she had no plan, no anchor, nothing but a crumpled ticket to a place she did not know. She hugged her bag tighter, curling into herself on the bench. She could feel people glancing at her as they walked by, some pitying, some amused, some indifferent. She thought of how easy it would be to vanish in this crowd, just another traveler waiting for departure. Yet she also felt more alone than she had ever felt in her 28 years. The station clock ticked overhead. Each minute dragged heavy with the weight of what had been lost. She thought of the wedding dress she had chosen so carefully, now wrinkled and smeared with city grime. She thought of the ring Mark had slipped on her finger during their rehearsal, a symbol that meant nothing now. She thought of the life she had built around someone else's promises, and how quickly it had dissolved into smoke. Clara lowered her head into her hands. She had always believed in stories with happy endings, believed that patience and kindness would eventually be rewarded. But tonight, in the cold expanse of Union Station, she wondered if she had been naive. She wondered if love was simply another train she had missed, one that would never circle back for her. Alexander Reed preferred trains to planes. It was not because he disliked flying, but because airports swarmed with cameras, reporters, and opportunists who would not let him breathe. On trains, especially the overnight express from St. Louis to Chicago, he could disappear into a private cabin and remember what it felt like to be a man rather than a headline. That night he stepped off the hallowed platform in a tailored charcoal suit, the collar of his coat turned up against the chill. He carried no entourage, no bodyguards, just a leather briefcase in one hand and the weight of his family's expectations in the other. His stride was purposeful, the kind of stride that came from years of negotiating billion-dollar deals, but his eyes were heavy with something more fragile, something that could not be bought or sold. As he crossed the terminal, his gaze caught on a sight so unexpected that he paused mid-step. A bride. A young woman in a once beautiful gown, the hem stained and frayed, sat hunched on a wooden bench. Mascara streaked her cheeks, and a small overnight bag sat at her feet like an abandoned pet. Commuters streamed around her, whispering, pointing, some raising their phones to capture her image. Alexander felt the sharp twist of recognition. He knew what it was to be scrutinized, to be stripped of humanity, and turned into spectacle. His chest tightened as he watched her flinch under the weight of strangers' stares. He could have kept walking. He could have told himself it was not his business that he had a family gathering to attend a dinner where he would be paraded in front of shareholders and relatives, all waiting to see if he would bend to their will and return to the woman they wanted for him. But something in the bride's hunched shoulders, in the way she tried to make herself invisible, would not let him. He crossed the floor in steady, deliberate steps, his shoes clicking against the marble. The teenagers who had been mocking her lowered their voices as he passed, sensing the power in his presence. When he reached her, he shrugged off his coat and draped it over her trembling shoulders. She startled, her wide eyes snapping up to meet his. For a moment he forgot to breathe. She was beautiful even through the smudged makeup and heartbreak, beautiful in a way that was raw and unvarnished. "You don't deserve their stares," he said, his voice low, carrying a resonance that seemed to calm the air around them. He leaned closer. His words meant only for her. "Pretend you're with me. Come home with me tonight." Her lips parted, confusion flashing across her face. For an instant she seemed to think he was mocking her too. But there was no mockery in his eyes, only urgency and something close to desperation. He knew how it sounded. Insane. Reckless. Yet it was the only thing that made sense to him in that moment. He needed a shield, and she needed rescue. Clara blinked, trying to process what this stranger was saying. She searched his expression for cruelty and found none. He was tall, imposing even, but his gaze held warmth that contrasted with the cold marble of the station. "Why?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from holding back tears. Alexander glanced toward the clock. Time was slipping. "Because if you sit here any longer, they will devour you. And because I cannot walk into that dinner alone tonight. Help me, and I promise you'll be safe from all of this." He gestured discreetly at the crowd of onlookers, then back at her. "Just for tonight." The way he said it, calm and commanding, made her pulse quicken. She wanted to tell him no, that she could not possibly walk away with a stranger, much less a man who looked like he belonged on the cover of Forbes. But the laughter of the teenagers echoed again across the hall. Another camera flash lit her in humiliation, and she found herself wavering. His hand extended toward her, steady and patient. "Clara," she managed. Surprised, she still remembered how to say her own name. His lips curved faintly. Alexander Reed. The name meant nothing to her in that instant, though half the city would have recognized it. What she saw was not a billionaire or a tycoon, but a man offering her a way out of a nightmare she had not chosen. She stared at his hand, at the promise of escape it held, and her breath came shallow. He leaned closer, his whisper firm. "Trust me. Just until midnight, if that's all you can give. Pretend you're mine." Clara's heart thudded in her chest. She thought of the ticket crumpled in her bag of the train that would take her to nowhere. She thought of the faces that would not stop staring, the shame that clung like a second veil. Then she placed her trembling hand into his. The moment their palms touched, the station faded, the whispers dulled, and for the first time that day, she felt anchored. His grip was strong but not suffocating, a promise wrapped in warmth. Alexander exhaled quietly, relief flickering across his face. "Good," he murmured, as though reassuring them both. "Then let's leave this place." With that, he helped her to her feet, sliding the coat more securely over her shoulders, shielding her from the prying eyes that followed them as they walked toward the exit. Clara dared a glance at him, still half convinced this was some fever dream born of despair. But the steadiness in his stride, the certainty in his voice told her otherwise. Whatever this was, it was real enough to carry her away from the wreckage of her life. And maybe, just maybe, towards something she had not yet imagined. Alexander guided Clara through the bustling night outside the station, his hand steady at her back, as though shielding her from the world's cruel gaze. The city lights glared, horns blared, and strangers turned their heads at the sight of a bride in disarray, escorted by a man who moved with the kind of quiet authority that drew both respect and curiosity. He led her to a sleek black car waiting at the curb. The driver opened the door without question, only a flicker of recognition in his eyes when he saw Alexander's unexpected companion. Inside the warm leather interior, Clara sank into the seat, still clutching her bag like a lifeline. Her voice broke the silence, hesitant and edged with disbelief. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Alexander settled beside her, his gaze fixed on the passing city as the car pulled into traffic. "Because I know what it feels like to be cornered by stares that judge and devour. And because tonight I cannot walk into that house alone. My family expects me to stand beside someone I no longer want. You appeared, and suddenly the answer was right in front of me. His tone was calm but urgent, as though the minutes ticking away mattered more than she could understand. Clara swallowed her throat tight. So you want me to pretend to be your date? That's insane. I'm nobody. He turned his eyes on her, then sharp and steady. You're not nobody. Tonight you're exactly who I need. My family is hosting an anniversary gala. The press will be there. My ex Victoria Hale will be there with her perfect smile and sharper claws. If I appear without someone by my side, they'll believe she still has a chance. If I arrive with you, they will see a man who has moved on. You give me leverage. And in return, I can give you a shield. No cameras mocking you, no strangers tearing you apart. Just one night. Then you can walk away, disappear if you wish. Clara stared at him, incredulous. The absurdity of it twisted with the desperation in her chest. A few hours ago, she had been abandoned in front of everyone she knew. Now a stranger with eyes like steel was offering her the chance to rewrite the narrative, even if it was a lie. Her fingers trembled in her lap. And what happens when they ask questions? When they realize I don't know a thing about you? Alexander's lips curved in a faint smile, though it carried no humor. Then we keep it simple. We've been seeing each other quietly for a few months. We met through work. You don't have to invent much else. I'll do most of the talking. All you have to do is stand beside me, hold my hand, and look at me as though we belong together. She let out a soft, bitter laugh. That's not something I'm good at. Belonging. His gaze softened, just for a heartbeat. Then let me carry that for you tonight. Clara turned toward the window, watching the blur of neon and headlights streak past. The car smelled of polished leather and faint sandalwood, a scent that clung to him like a second skin. She felt the weight of his coat still around her shoulders, the warmth it carried. Every instinct screamed that this was reckless, that she should run while she still could. And yet the memory of laughter in the station, the sting of humiliation, burned deeper. Running away had only led her to more shame. Perhaps stepping into a stranger's world, however absurd, was the only way forward. She drew in a shaky breath. Fine, just for one night. His shoulders eased, as though he had been holding tension she could not see. That's all I ask. He extended his hand once more, not for a handshake, but as an unspoken pact. Clara hesitated only a moment before placing her palm in his. His grip was warm, firm, reassuring. In that clasp lay the beginning of a bargain neither of them fully understood, one that would carry them into the fire together. Alexander's voice dropped to a whisper, meant only for her. Thank you, Clara. You've already saved me more than you know. She wanted to scoff, to remind him that she was the one who needed saving. But as the car turned toward the shimmering skyline where his family estate waited, she realized they were both stepping into a masquerade that might change everything. The car wound its way through the affluent neighborhoods that edged Lake Michigan, where mansions stood like fortresses of glass and stone, their windows glowing with golden light against the night. Clara's breath caught as Alexander's home came into view, a sprawling estate framed by wrought iron gates and perfectly trimmed hedges. It looked less like a residence and more like a palace prepared for royalty. She shrank into her borrowed coat, clutching her bag as though it might anchor her to reality. The driveway curved toward an entrance lit with chandeliers that spilled light across the marble steps. Valets rushed forward to open doors for arriving guests, women in shimmering gowns stepping out with practiced grace, men in tuxedos with laughter polished to perfection. The car slowed and Clara's heart thudded painfully in her chest. I can't go in there, she whispered. Alexander's gaze met hers, steady and commanding. Yes, you can. You're with me. They will see what I want them to see. The driver opened the door and Alexander stepped out, extending his hand to her once again. Clara hesitated, then placed her trembling fingers in his. The moment her heels touched the ground, flashes erupted. Photographers stationed discreetly at the entrance raised their cameras, the lenses drinking in every detail. Alexander's hand tightened reassuringly around hers. He inclined his head toward the lights with practiced indifference, then guided her up the steps as though she belonged at his side. Inside, the grandeur deepened. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, their light reflected in the polished marble floors. A string quartet filled the air with elegant music. Guests mingled with champagne flutes, their voices a low hum of wealth and privilege. Clara felt the weight of 100 eyes turned toward her, whispers curling in the air. "She's not from our circle," one woman murmured, her diamonds glittering as she leaned toward her companion. "Where did he find her?" Another voice floated. Clara's cheeks burned and she lowered her gaze, but Alexander tilted her chin up gently, his touch firm yet protective. "Look at me," he whispered, "not at them." And so she did. His presence shielded her more effectively than any wall. He led her into the throng, shaking hands, exchanging greetings, introducing her not as a stranger, but as if she had always been there. "This is Clara," he said simply, his tone leaving no room for question. The name fell into the room like a stone into water, rippling through the crowd. Clara clung to his arm, her pulse quickening with every skeptical glance. When the string quartet shifted into a waltz, Alexander turned to her, eyes softened by something she did not yet understand. "Dance with me." Her heart leapt. I don't know how she whispered. His lips curved into the faintest smile. Then, "Let me lead." He guided her onto the polished floor, one hand at her waist, the other holding her hand with unwavering steadiness. The music swelled, and they began to move. At first she stumbled, her nerves tripping over every step, but Alexander's grip never faltered. He guided her gently, his movements confident, drawing her into rhythm, until she found herself swaying with him, the world falling away. The whispers faded, the chandeliers blurred into soft halos, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as if only the two of them existed. Clara's breath caught as she looked up at him, his features illuminated by the warm glow of the lights. There was no mockery in his eyes, no calculation, only focus, as though he saw her and no one else. "You're doing beautifully," he murmured. She shook her head, a nervous laugh escaping. "You make it seem like I belong here." His gaze deepened. "You do." Her chest tightened, emotions swirling so swiftly she could not name them. The music carried them through the hall, and for once she was not the abandoned bride, not the woman mocked in a train station, but a partner in something far grander than herself. When the music drew to a close, the applause of the guests was polite, but restrained curiosity sharper than admiration. Alexander bowed slightly, keeping her hand in his. He led her from the floor and into a side corridor lined with portraits away from the murmuring crowd. Clara leaned against the cool wall, her breath unsteady. "Why me?" she asked softly. Alexander studied her, his expression unreadable. "Because tonight, I needed someone real. And you are the most real person in this room." The words struck her more deeply than any compliment ever had. She wanted to argue, to remind him that she was broken, discarded, mocked, but the sincerity in his tone made her fall silent. The sound of footsteps drew near, laughter high and sharp. Clara braced herself as a woman approached, tall and statuesque, in a gown of crimson silk, her smile gleaming with practiced perfection. Victoria Hale, the X. Her eyes swept over Clara with the cool precision of a blade, and her smile curved wider. "Alexander," she purred, "you didn't tell me you were bringing company." Alexander's hand closed more tightly around Clara's, his voice calm but edged with warning. "Victoria, this is Clara, my fiancée." The word hung in the air, shocking even to Clara. Fiancé. She forced herself not to react, not to reveal her disbelief, as Victoria's eyes narrowed, her smile sharp as glass. "How unexpected," she murmured. Clara straightened her shoulders, meeting Victoria's gaze with a steadiness she did not know she possessed. "Nice to meet you." The tension between the three of them thickened, the air charged with unspoken challenge. For the first time that night, Clara realized she was not merely a guest in a masquerade. She was a player in a game larger than she could yet imagine. The corridors beyond the ballroom were quieter, lit by sconces that cast golden pools of light along the paneled walls. Clara's pulse still raced from the confrontation with Victoria, but Alexander walked with calm certainty, his hand never leaving hers. He guided her through French doors that opened onto a wide veranda overlooking manicured gardens. The night air was cool, scented faintly with roses and trimmed hedges. Clara inhaled, deeply grateful for the space, for the absence of whispers. "I don't belong here," she said softly, her voice breaking the silence. Alexander turned toward her, his gaze steady. "Neither do I, not really." She frowned. "You live here. This is your world." He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "This is my father's world. I grew up surrounded by chandeliers and champagne, but never once did I feel at home. My mother tried to make it bearable, but when she died it became a prison built of marble and expectations." His voice softened, vulnerable. "That is why I prefer trains. Out there I am not Alexander Reed, heir to an empire. I am just a man traveling between destinations." Clara studied him, surprised by the confession. Beneath the polished exterior, beneath the billionaire title, was someone who understood loneliness, who carried ghosts of his own. She wrapped his coat tighter around her shoulders, searching for words. "My mother used to tell me, don't choose someone perfect. Choose someone who stays." I thought I had that. I thought Mark would stay. Her throat caught the name still bitter on her tongue, but he left me standing in front of everyone as if I were disposable. Alexander's hand tightened gently over hers, grounding her. "He was a fool, and he gave me the chance to meet you." Clara's breath hitched, warmth rising in her chest, though she told herself not to believe too quickly. She turned her gaze toward the gardens where lanterns hung from branches, swaying in the night breeze. Alexander followed her eyes. "There is something I want to show you," he said. He led her along a stone path until they reached a smaller building tucked at the edge of the estate. Its windows were dark, its wooden door worn with age. He produced a key from his pocket, unlocked it, and pushed it open. Inside was a room unlike the glittering mansion. It was warm, lined with shelves of books and photographs, dust clinging to the corners. In the center stood an old piano, its wood faded but dignified. Clara stepped inside hesitantly. "What is this place?" Alexander's eyes softened. "It was my mother's, her sanctuary. After she died, my father locked the room. He thought it was a distraction, a weakness. I had it restored when I was old enough, but I never brought anyone here. Until now." Clara approached the piano, trailing her fingers along the smooth, time-worn keys. A lump formed in her throat. She must have loved music. "She did," Alexander said quietly. "She believed music could reveal the truth people tried to hide. She used to play for me at night when I could not sleep. This room is the only place I feel like she is still near." Clara pressed one key, the soft note echoing in the room like a whisper of memory. She turned to him. "Why show me this?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because you are the first person I trust to see this part of me." The words hit her harder than any compliment. Trust. It was something she had craved and never truly received, something she had given and had broken. She blinked back sudden tears, her heart aching and hopeful all at once. He stepped closer, the distance between them narrowing, until she could feel the warmth radiating from him. His voice was low, intimate. "You looked at me tonight as though I was not a name in a headline, not a pawn in my family's empire. You saw me." Her pulse quickened, her breath uneven. She forced herself to steady her voice. "And you make me feel like I am not invisible." Their eyes locked, a fragile moment suspended between confession and temptation. Clara's mind screamed caution, but her heart leaned closer. She pulled back just enough to break the spell, turning back to the piano. "We should go before someone notices we are gone." Alexander studied her for a long moment, then nodded, though his eyes lingered with something unspoken. Together they left the sanctuary, the scent of old wood and memory clinging to them like a secret. As they walked back into the glow of the mansion, Clara realized something had shifted. The masquerade was still on the lies, still necessary, but beneath it, something real had begun to take root. She was no longer just a shield for him, and he was no longer just an escape for her. Their connection had become something neither of them expected, something that frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. And as she looked up at Alexander, she saw a flicker of the same realization in his eyes, a spark that promised both salvation and danger. The music from the ballroom drifted faintly through the corridors when they returned, but Clara felt heavier now, carrying both the comfort of Alexander's secret and the weight of her own unraveling life. She tried to keep her head high as he guided her back into the glittering crowd, but the stares pressed harder than ever. It did not take long before Victoria reappeared, her crimson dress slicing through the sea of muted gowns like a warning flare. She intercepted them near the champagne fountain, her smile poised, her eyes sharp. "What a lovely performance," she said, voice dripping with honey, dancing whispers in dark corners, almost convincing. Clara stiffened, but Alexander's arm remained firm around her. "It is not a performance," he said flatly. Victoria's gaze slid to Clara, assessing, dissecting. "Do you know who you are standing beside? Do you know the kind of world he belongs to? You are nothing but a stand-in bride, a distraction. He will tire of you and move on just as he always does." Clara's stomach twisted, but before she could respond, Victoria's words grew sharper. "I have seen your name before, Clara Dawson, a little marketing firm downtown, was it not? The one where you were dismissed for stealing campaign ideas from your boss? I suppose desperation makes thieves of us all." The words landed like stones, and Clara froze, panic tightening her chest. She had left that job when budget cuts gutted the team, but how could she prove it here in front of a woman who wielded lies like weapons? Around them, a few guests leaned closer, their curiosity piqued. Alexander's expression darkened, but Clara, overwhelmed, shook her head. "I cannot do this," she whispered. She slipped free of his grasp and hurried through the crowd, ignoring the startled gasps, ignoring the way phones lifted discreetly to capture her retreat. She pushed through the doors and out into the rain that had begun to fall, cool drops soaking into the lace of her gown. Her vision blurred not just from the storm, but from tears she could no longer hold back. She stumbled down the steps, the sound of music fading behind her, and found herself running across the gravel drive, the wet stones biting at her heels. "I will not be your charity case," she whispered fiercely into the night, though no one could hear. "I will not be a pawn in your war." She reached the edge of the property, breath ragged, the rain plastering her hair against her face. The humiliation of the church returned sharper now, paired with the sting of Victoria's accusations. She could already imagine the headlines spreading through social media. "Runaway bride turned billionaire's fake fiancé caught in another scandal." Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the wet grass, her gown heavy and ruined. For a long moment, she sat there trembling, torn between the urge to disappear forever and the faint, fragile hope that maybe someone would come after her. Inside the mansion, Alexander stood still, fury simmering beneath his polished exterior. He had known Victoria would strike, but he had underestimated her cruelty. Worse, he had underestimated how deeply Clara still carried the weight of shame. He turned on his heel and strode toward his father, who was conversing with shareholders near the bar. "What did you hear?" Alexander demanded. His father's brows arched. "Enough to question whether this farce has gone on long enough. She is beneath us, Alexander. Do not drag this family into scandal for the sake of some broken woman." The words sliced through him, but Alexander kept his voice low and controlled. "She is not beneath us. She is stronger than anyone in this room." His father scoffed, lifting a glass of brandy. "Strength does not erase disgrace. End this before it destroys you." Alexander did not reply. He turned and strode into the rain, searching the grounds until he found Clara huddled at the edge of the property. Her shoulders shook beneath the weight of his coat still draped around her, though it was soaked through now. He crouched before her, his voice rough. "Clara, look at me." She lifted her face, rain mingling with tears, eyes wide with despair. "You heard what she said. You heard them all. It is true to them. I am a joke, a charity case." He shook his head, his hand steady against her damp cheek. "No, you are the only thing that has felt real in years. Do not let her poison touch you." She let out a bitter laugh. "You think this is strength? Running away twice in one night? I cannot do this, Alexander. I cannot stand in your world and be torn apart for existing." His grip tightened gently. "Then we will prove them wrong. We will show them the truth. But I need you to trust me." Her lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to trust, but the scars of humiliation were raw. Before she could answer, the flash of a camera cut through the night. Paparazzi had followed their lenses gleaming, capturing the image of a bride on the ground, a billionaire kneeling before her in the rain. Voices rose, questions hurled, accusations framed into headlines before morning. Clara recoiled, burying her face in her hands. "It is happening again," she whispered. Alexander stood, fury radiating from him as he spread his arms wide to shield her from the cameras. "Enough," he barked, his voice echoing against the mansion walls. Security rushed forward, scattering the reporters, but the damage had already been done. Clara's shame was no longer confined to whispers in a ballroom. It was immortalized in photographs already racing through the veins of the internet. She rose unsteadily, her eyes meeting his. "I cannot stay," she whispered. She turned and walked away into the storm, her figure swallowed by the night, leaving Alexander standing in the rain, vowing silently that this would not be the end. The storm outside had thinned by morning, but the storm inside Alexander Reed had only grown. His study was littered with newspapers and tablets, each headline worse than the last. Runaway bride turned billionaire fiancé. Mystery woman collapses at Reed Gala. Charity case or con artist. Every photo showed Clara drenched in rain mascara, streaked his coat slipping from her shoulders while he crouched before her like a man begging forgiveness. The world devoured scandal, and they were a feast. Yet Alexander's anger was not at the press, not even at his father's cold reprimands, but at himself for failing to shield Clara. She had run because he had not been enough. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. Within an hour, his attorney arrived with a private investigator in tow. "I need proof," Alexander said, his tone sharp. "Victoria planted this. Find every thread. I do not care how deep it runs." The investigator nodded grimly. "We will trace the documents she used, the story she leaked, everything." Alexander leaned over the desk. "Do it fast. She is out there alone, and if I do not clear her name, she will never come back." Across the city, Clara sat in a cramped motel room, her gown ruined, replaced with jeans and a sweater bought hastily at a 24-hour store. She stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror, barely recognizing the woman who looked back. Her phone buzzed endlessly with messages from numbers she did not know, reporters begging for a quote, strangers hurling insults and pity alike. She wanted to throw the phone away to vanish completely, but a small voice inside reminded her of Alexander's whisper. "You are the first person I have trusted to see this part of me." The memory cut through the haze, warming and wounding her at once. She closed her eyes, wishing she could believe him. By the third day, the investigator returned to Alexander with a thick file. "She paid for it," he said simply. Victoria hired a firm that specializes in fabricating records. The accusations about Clara's job, the rumors, even the timing of the leaks, all of it orchestrated. Alexander flipped through the evidence each page, tightening his jaw further. Signed invoices, emails traced to Victoria's assistant, false employment records confirmed as forged. "Good," he said, his voice like steel. "Now we end this." That evening he summoned his family and their closest allies to the great hall of the mansion. The same chandeliers that had sparkled over laughter now shone coldly over tense faces. Victoria was there, radiant in another gown, feigning innocence. His father stood at the center, arms folded, waiting for his son to concede. Alexander stepped forward, the folder in his hand. Enough of whispers, he began, his voice carrying across the room. "Last night you condemned Clara based on lies. Tonight you will see the truth." He opened the file, laying out the documents on the long mahogany table. Gasps rose as names and signatures stared back at them. Victoria Hale paid to fabricate accusations against Clara Dawson. She planted false records, spread rumors, and fed the press. All to destroy the woman I chose. Murmurs rippled through the hall, some shocked, some skeptical. Victoria's mask cracked, her smile faltering. "This is absurd," she said quickly. "Anyone can create papers." "You expect us to believe you over your own emails," Alexander interrupted, holding up the printed correspondence. Her silence was damning. His father shifted uneasily, the weight of evidence undeniable. Alexander's voice grew louder, firm with conviction. "I choose Clara, not because of appearances, not because of convenience, because she is extraordinary. She has more courage in her than anyone in this room who hides behind wealth and reputation. You will respect her or you will lose me." The hall fell silent. Victoria's face hardened, but she knew she had lost. With a huff of outrage, she turned and swept out her heels, striking the marble like gunshots. No one followed. Alexander exhaled his chest, rising and falling as though a great burden had lifted. But when he looked around, Clara was not there. Clearing her name was not enough. He needed her to hear him. He needed her to believe. He left the hall, ignoring his father's calls, and drove through the city until he found the motel where she had hidden. The door opened slowly when he knocked, Clara's wary eyes meeting his. She looked exhausted, her face bare of makeup, her hair tied back, but to him she had never looked more real. "You should not be here," she whispered. "The world thinks I am a scandal." He stepped inside, holding the folder out to her. "The world is wrong. Victoria did this. I have proof. You are innocent, Clara, and you are not a scandal. You are the only person who has ever made me want to be honest." She took the folder with trembling hands, flipping through the evidence. Relief and disbelief warred in her expression, tears welling. "You did this for me." He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I did this because you matter. Because you are not my shield or my charity case. You are the woman who makes me want to fight." Her tears spilled her body, shaking as the walls she had built began to crumble. "I do not know if I can survive in your world," she confessed. His gaze softened, steady as stone. "Then we will build a new one together." She let out a shaky laugh, half sob, half hope, and for the first time since the church she believed it might be possible. Weeks passed, and the storm of scandal began to fade into the background noise of a city that thrived on constant distraction. Clara found herself walking through the polished halls of the Reed Foundation no longer as an intruder, but as the newly appointed director of community projects. The title felt surreal, yet the work grounded her. She spent her days meeting with nonprofit leaders, drafting proposals for healthcare outreach, and speaking with people who had never heard of her public humiliation. They saw her not as a runaway bride or the subject of a viral photo, but as a professional who listened and cared. It was Alexander who had opened the door, but it was Clara who built her place inside. In the evenings, she returned to the quieter side of Alexander's world, far removed from galas and shareholders. She discovered that beneath the polish of his reputation, he was a man who read until dawn, who burned toast every time he tried to cook, who knelt in the soil of his garden with his sleeves rolled up, tending to fragile plants, with a patience that startled her. These glimpses stitched a new kind of intimacy between them, one built not on spectacle, but on ordinary tenderness. One evening, as she left a meeting, she was swarmed by a cluster of reporters who had not forgotten her story. Microphones thrust into her face, questions shouted over one another. Clara froze, her chest tightening, the old panic rising. But before she could crumble, Alexander appeared at her side, his coat once again draped around her shoulders, his hand clasping hers firmly. He looked straight into the cameras, his voice calm but commanding. "If you want me, you will respect her." The words landed like thunder, silencing the clamor. He led her through the crowd with unshakable confidence, his presence making it clear that Clara was no longer a target, but a partner. That night she whispered to him, "Why do you keep rescuing me?" He kissed her forehead softly. "Because you rescued me first." Months blurred into a rhythm of work and stolen moments of laughter shared over late-night pizza in his kitchen of long walks, where no one recognized them. Clara began to believe not just in survival, but in rebirth. The woman who had sat alone at a train station in a torn wedding gown was gone, replaced by someone who had fought for her place and found a man who cherished her strength. One spring afternoon, Alexander asked her to take a drive. She agreed, curious, and soon realized the road led back toward Union Station. The building loomed ahead as familiar as a scar. Her heart skipped, but Alexander's hand found hers on the console, steadying her. "Trust me," he murmured. He parked and led her inside. The station buzzed with travelers just as it had that night. Clara's chest tightened with memories, but Alexander guided her to the very bench where she had sat alone, mascara streaked and shattered. He dropped to one knee, his suit immaculate, but his eyes raw with sincerity. In his hand was a small velvet box. "The night you sat here, you thought your story ended," he said, his voice carrying over the hum of the station. "But it had only just begun. You gave me the courage to fight for myself, for us. Will you marry me? Clara Dawson." Her breath caught tears flooding her eyes. The image of that broken bride flashed in her mind, but now she saw her future instead of her failure. She nodded, her voice trembling but firm. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and the station around them seemed to blur, the crowd irrelevant. The sound of a departing train like applause rolling through the hall. They stood together, his arm around her, her smile radiant through tears. In that moment, the humiliation of the past transformed into the foundation of a love story that felt unshakable. The train she thought she had missed had only led her to where she was always meant to be. The day of their small ceremony arrived not in a cathedral of glass and chandeliers, but in a garden filled with blooming magnolias, the kind of place where beauty felt honest and unforced. Clara wore a gown, simple and elegant, nothing like the lace cage she had once stood trapped in. Her friends from the foundation were there, people who had known her not as a headline, but as a woman who worked with her heart. Alexander's closest allies filled the rows, those who had seen him step out from his father's shadow and claim his own path. As Clara walked down the aisle this time, there was no trembling, no hollow pit of dread. Her eyes sought Alexander's and found him waiting steady and smiling as though the rest of the world did not exist. The vows they exchanged were not elaborate, not polished for effect, but raw promises born from nights of fear and mornings of quiet laughter. "I choose you," Alexander said, his voice steady, yet thick with emotion. "Not because you rescued me from loneliness, not because you silenced the world's doubts, but because with you I am myself. And that is all I have ever wanted to be." Clara's tears spilled freely as she replied, "I choose you because you stayed when others left, because you made me believe that love is not about perfection, but about presence. I promise to stand with you even when the world is louder than our own voices." When the officiant pronounced them, husband and wife, applause rose, but Clara barely heard it. Alexander leaned forward and kissed her gently, not with the hunger of possession, but with the reverence of someone who had found home. Later, as twilight settled, the two of them returned to Union Station one last time, not in gowns or tuxedos, but in simple clothes, hand in hand. They sat together on the same bench where her story had nearly ended. Trains roared past, steam, rising travelers hurrying by, but for them, time slowed. Alexander reached for her hand, the ring glinting under the station lights. "Sometimes the train we think we missed," he said softly, "is just the one leading us to where we belong." Clara leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and felt peace in a place that once held only despair. She had been humiliated, mocked, abandoned, yet none of it defined her anymore. What defined her was the choice to keep moving forward, and the man who chose to walk beside her. Together they rose, stepping into the night as a whistle blew the sound like a reminder that journeys never end, they only change tracks. Their love was not a fairy tale, but something rarer forged from pain, trust, and courage. It was proof that even in the most unlikely places, when hope seems lost and the world has turned cruel, love can appear with the quietest whisper. And sometimes that whisper is enough to rewrite everything. So the story closes, not with Clara left behind, but with Clara and Alexander stepping toward the unknown hand in hand, hearts unafraid, ready for whatever destination waited next.